Right, so this one is probably going to make some people upset with me. As we come to the end of November and the end of my true indie-thon, I'm going to be covering something that is right on the edge of what can be called indie animation, but I really need to talk about this, so I'm saying it counts. For those of you who don't know this show from the thumbnail, let me hit you with a cold open to explain how we got here. It was a rainy winter night in the depth of July here in Australia, and a 14-year-old Uncom was busy finishing up his second rewatch of Race to the Moon, when a video popped up on his recommended sidebar mentioning a creature known as a Tarrasque. Having recently watched some Dungeons & Dragons YouTubers, I knew exactly what this was and was instantly intrigued, so I clicked on the video and was met with the voice and characters of Dingo Doodles, the creator of the Fool's Gold D&D story. For the next 5 years up until today, I've watched every episode of Fool's Gold as it released, from the Bellowing Wilds to Kylandria and through the portal to the new home of the Foreclaimers. It is a very captivating and very emotional story that I would recommend you go watch before continuing with this video. I'll link a playlist up here for you to do that because I will not be explaining the first 2/3 of this campaign at all in this video. My problems begin mostly upon entering this side of the portal, a place where, much like the life itself, the story of these characters starts to break down, leading to something that I think is quite possibly the worst thing to happen to any show: an undeserved finale. Okay, that's enough flowery, vague language. Let's get into the real meat of what's wrong here. There are 4 problems, each revolving around a central character, and I will be naming them as such. And Arena is the first one to rear its head in the series. To anyone who has spent a decent amount of time with this series, it is very clear that Arena is the odd one out in this group. Sips and Gothy are both built heavily into the story. Their character arcs are central to the entire plot and follow the main line of it clearly. This is especially true of Gothy, whose character bridges both the history of the world and its future together. Without her, the story doesn't work whatsoever. Similarly, Sips' character origins have been beautifully melded into the greater narrative, creating the best twist in the show during the battle with Beauclair. Arena just doesn't have this feeling of importance to her. Her character doesn't really fit into the world. She is inherently goofy and always feels just a little bit out of place. That's not always inherently a bad thing, as an out-of-place character in a world is inherently very entertaining and can make for good storytelling as well as functioning as the comic relief. Felix, the DM of this campaign, also does a good job making her weirdness feel justified by placing her from another nation entirely, a nation we get to visit and see some major plot development in. Arena gets to undergo serious change and has a new motive to find the only parent she has left after killing the tyrants that ended both her father and her relationship. She sets off on this journey alone, mostly, and then it just sort of falls apart. We never see anything else from Abby the Red Panda, aside from Sips stealing her bathrobe without Arena even being present, and the quest to find her mum ends quickly and in a very unsatisfying way. Arena's mum is part of a homebrew mercury dragon that offers her a deal to exchange her mother's life for her own. A thought-provoking decision and an opportunity to try and find a way around the problem to get what she wants without having to sacrifice everything. Instead, Arena's player decides to simply turn and run away, abandoning her mum entirely, and it's almost never brought up again. From this point on, her character is essentially a background extra, going along with whatever Gothy and Sips are doing because she has no goals of her own anymore. She doesn't have a particular vested interest in the Foreclaimers or a need to solve the problems of her past. Hell, she doesn't even keep hold of her segment of the crystal the whole way through. This can be seen in the videos themselves as well. Arena's character slowly gets less and less screen time and dialogue, making way for NPCs as well as a lot of Sips and Gothy talking. The next problem lies with one of those characters, our tragic monkey child Sips. The problem with him lies deep in the series, well after they have entered the portal. In this exact moment here, where Zanu's crystal is extracted from his head and his curse takes over. Throughout the whole series, Sips' character has been focused on his battle with the curse, both mentally and physically. It controls him, his actions, his feelings, and who he interacts with. This moment where the crystal is ripped from his head and the curse finally wins that fight should be the end of Sips' story. He has tried and tried and tried to best it. By himself, by killing the person who gave it to him, with the help of a literal god, but he could never beat it. Why? Because the curse is a part of himself. It represents his insecurities and beliefs that he's not good enough, something that everyone struggles with and nobody can avoid. The fantastic symbolism here is if you ruminate on those insecurities and let them dictate your actions, you will ultimately be consumed by them and lose yourself. That is phenomenal storytelling and the main reason I stuck with this project as long as I have. There are only 2 YouTubers on the entire platform that I've been watching for longer than Dingo consistently, and it's because of this. That is also why the final conversation between the elder of Stella's children and Sips is my favourite scene. It's powerful, thought-provoking, and beautifully executed. right up until the point where he comes back. When Sips is reborn in his tiny body, he loses his curse, which also means that he loses what made him so interesting to watch. Without that core struggle, he's just an angry monkey who gets in over his head a lot, and that's not a description I want to give to this character. By allowing him to lose that representation of the flaws in himself, it makes him a lot less interesting, and also paints a false narrative of that being something that people are able to do. You can live with your insecurities, but you can never really get rid of them. And while I think these criticisms are valid, they've been pulling me apart and making me agonize over including them over the last week because of one very simple thing. This is a D&D campaign made into a story. I think you figured out by now that my main suggestions for improving this story would be to have these characters leave the narrative when their arc is complete. That is storytelling 101. It's useless to have the character on a journey when they've already reached the destination. But this is not a regular story, it's a group campaign. You can't, as the DM, say to your players, right, your arc's over, you can leave now, because that's a dick move. From my perspective, what needs to be done here is to give these characters a smaller, new personal motivation to press on, and it is attempted to do that in the form of stopping the extraction of another son from this new world. This works flawlessly on Gothy, who does not want to see the past that she knows very well repeating itself. You can make the argument that this also happens for Sips and Arena, but that's mostly based on them having a strong attachment to Gothy. So it is better than them having to do this because they want to be heroes, they don't, but it's still much less gripping than the first part of the story, because it's not uniquely their struggles. Before we get into my final point and my potential reason for this being an undeserved ending, let's tick off a smaller problem I have with Godric and his plan. The entire identity of Godric is built around efficiency and perfection. He himself wants to be the perfect immortal life form. That is why he has another crystal in his chest, and that is why he wants to bring down the next sun. That is also not a good explanation for why he built this massive dragon powered by what are essentially dead Four-Claimers. He said himself that he has absolutely no fear of Stella's children and doesn't even consider them a noteworthy threat. There is also nothing else out here that he can't deal with relatively easily. His in-universe reasoning for this is that it's a weapon for complete annihilation, but that still doesn't make it necessary. The Panthers and other new animatronics would be enough to wipe Stella's children out on their own. With all that said, why did he feel the need to make this thing? It serves no purpose, it is completely contrary to his whole belief system. You can't even say he built it in anticipation of our group, because 1, it was ready ridiculously quickly, and 2, there is no way he could have ever known the group would have had access to the old mech dragon. And now, we finally get to Xanu. Good God, Xanu. Xanu is by far the worst part of this story because of just how inconsistent he is. First off, his main reason for wanting to commit genocide is that he believes that the Four-Claimers' lack of empathy makes them fundamentally flawed and deserving of extinction, mostly as a result of all the torture he's undergone. Fine, fair enough, pretty decent reasoning. However, upon finding Stella's children and seeing that they do have empathy, he refuses to give up on his plan of killing them because they, quote, might return to their old ways. He never seems to have this problem with Gothy though, who he believes is always going to be empathetic because she was in the past. This stupid double standard is a fine thing to have in a regular character, but this is God, an artificial deity who should be more than capable of seeing this flaw in his own logic, especially because he shares the Four-Claimers' logical thinking style. This problem pales in comparison to the main issue with him though, and that is what happens when he actually gets his body back. First off, he loses access to all of his soul magic. Why? It's never explained, he just can't do that anymore. This is clear evidence of taping over a plot hole because the actual full power of Xanu would completely break this story, so he must be neutered. Unfortunately, Felix decided to do too much for too long and made it so that he's barely able to stand without holding onto something. It also takes him multiple days to learn how to walk and pick things up. Then they suddenly transition to him being able to fight at full pace and almost take down the closest thing to another god there is. Episode 36, they are making a joke about him holding a plant because he can't figure out how to put it down. Episode 7, they are actively fighting against the most powerful Four-Claimer to ever live and surviving. That doesn't make any sense. There is no progression where there really needs to be some, and it makes this whole fight feel out of place. It just doesn't work. So, why do they do it? Well, this is the finale to the story of Gothy and Xanu, the main story of Fool's Gold. It is their combination and their friendship and love for one another that is ultimately able to topple the society that has caused both of them so much pain. This cannot be accomplished if Xanu is not there to help Gothi with the fight, as she would logically never be able to take down Godric by herself. The choice to make these goofy jokes at Xanu's expense leading up to the final battle ultimately end up cheapening it because it's no longer believable within the world of the story. It's undeserved. And here is where we come to the end of the video, where I must make one very important point. My criticisms of the end of this show do not make this a bad product to watch. Nothing here is a complete killer of the plot. More so, they are omissions that I would have liked to see fixed, or attempts at humour that I don't think landed, or replaced something more serious that would have been a better fit. Overall though, for this series being based on a D&D campaign done several years ago made by 2 people, it is tremendously well put together and has far more emotional weight than it has any right to. While I will say that the ending of Fool's Gold is not all that it could have been, I will quote Tyro, who quoted Pastra, and say that my criticisms of this show do not detract from the reason I enjoy it in the first place. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you all for watching, and have a good one.